Elena was dismissed the moment she stepped into the grand hall of the Whitmore estate. Her gray linen dress hung softly against her frame, a pale cardigan slipping off one shoulder, and worn leather flats barely making a sound on the marble floor. She carried a simple canvas tote, the kind you'd bring to a farmer's market, not the kind you'd expect at the reading of a billion-dollar will. It was enough to draw sneers from the room packed with polished heirs, their suits sharp, their smiles sharper. Richard Whitmore, cousin to the late Marcus, was the first to laugh, his gold watch catching the light as he pointed. "Who let the cleaning staff wander in here?" His sister, Victoria, followed with a smirk. "Maybe she's here to dust off the will." Phones were raised. Photos snapped. One by one, they whispered, mocked, and shared her image online, branding her a nobody. But what they didn't know was that Elena wasn't there by mistake. She was Marcus Whitmore's legal wife. And this reading of the will was a trap, one she helped design. The Whitmore estate stood like a monument to old money, stone walls wrapped in ivy, towering iron gates, and a long driveway that curved toward the grand hall like an invitation only the worthy would ever receive. Inside, the chandeliers sparkled against polished oak and marble, the air thick with the scent of roses and entitlement. It was just before 10 in the morning. The will reading for Marcus Whitmore, the elusive billionaire entrepreneur whose private jet had vanished 6 months ago, was about to begin. His relatives, business partners, and so-called friends gathered beneath the vaulted ceilings, their voices hushed but eager, rehearsing condolences they didn't mean. The men adjusted their designer ties, the women smoothed their silk dresses and flashed diamond rings as they clinked glasses of vintage champagne. And then Elena walked in. No one recognized her, or at least no one cared to. She wasn't dressed like they were. Her linen dress, soft with age, fell loosely around her frame. The cardigan draped over her shoulders was a pale blue, its sleeves slightly stretched, worn thin at the elbows. Her leather flats were scuffed, the kind that spoke of long walks and everyday use, not chauffeurs and luxury cars. The only thing she carried was a canvas tote, plain, stitched with care, no logo, no designer label. It hung from her shoulder as she slipped quietly into the back corner of the room, near a tall window that framed the mist-covered hills outside. The room noticed her immediately, but not with curiosity, only contempt. Richard Whitmore, tall, square-jawed, and perpetually overdressed, spotted her first. He leaned against the edge of a mahogany table, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd. "Someone call housekeeping," he quipped, eyes fixed on Elena. "I think one of the staff got lost." The comment earned a ripple of laughter from the nearby cousins. Victoria, his sister, in a tight crimson dress, barely glanced at Elena before tossing her hair over one shoulder. "She might be here to polish the silver," she said with a sweet venom that clung to every word. The snickering grew louder as phones came out. Ashley, the youngest niece, a social media darling with more followers than empathy, nudged her friend Jenna and snapped a photo of Elena standing by the window. "Found the charity case," Ashley whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. She grinned as her thumbs flew over her phone, crafting a caption meant to humiliate. "Crashing the Whitmore will reading in thrift store chic." Jenna laughed, leaning in to get a better angle. "This is going straight to my story." Elena heard every word. She saw the flash of the camera, the smirks, the rolled eyes. She felt their judgment wrap around her like chains, but she didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself, didn't shrink away, didn't even meet their glares. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her tote, her eyes drifting back to the front of the room, where an empty chair waited for the lawyer who would soon read Marcus Whitmore's final will. And as the laughter behind her swelled, Elena remained still, quiet, patient, and exactly where she was meant to be. The laughter didn't die down. If anything, it grew bolder, feeding off Elena's silence as if her calm was some kind of challenge they were determined to break. Ashley leaned toward Jenna, eyes glittering with mischief. "She hasn't even said a word. Think she knows we're talking about her." Jenna smirked. "Oh, she knows." Across the room, Daniel Whitmore, a distant cousin whose trust fund outweighed his achievements, grinned and scribbled something hastily on a cocktail napkin. With a flick of his wrist, he scrawled the words "charity case" in thick black ink. Laughing under his breath, he walked past Elena's corner, casual as could be, and tucked the napkin into the strap of her tote when she wasn't looking. The cousins nearby noticed immediately. They elbowed each other, barely able to hold in their snickers. A few lifted their phones, snapping photos of the cruel joke. The words on the napkin, hanging from Elena's bag like a neon sign, shouted louder than any insult. "God, that's brutal," someone murmured, but no one stopped it. Victoria's heels clicked sharply against the marble as she crossed the room, her crimson dress swaying with every step like a warning. She stopped just inches from Alina, towering above her smaller frame, lips curled in mock pity. "You're in the wrong place, sweetheart," Victoria said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. She reached out, flicking the edge of Alina's cardigan between two manicured fingers, as if brushing away dirt. "This isn't a soup kitchen. Why don't you head out before you really embarrass yourself?" The insult hung heavy in the air, the room holding its breath, waiting for a reaction. But Alina didn't move. Her fingers stayed steady on the strap of her tote. She didn't look at Victoria, didn't even glance at the napkin now dangling from her bag. Instead, her gaze stayed fixed on the front of the room, calm and unreadable. The lack of response only fueled their cruelty. Richard chuckled from across the hall, raising his glass. "She's got nerve, I'll give her that." Ashley, still busy on her phone, spoke without looking up. "This is blowing up already. People are eating it up." She turned the screen toward Jenna, showing the flood of comments piling in beneath the photo of Alina. Words like nobody, gold digger, pathetic flashed across the display, each one a digital stone thrown by strangers. Alina stood motionless, her expression unchanging, as the weight of those words filled the space around her. Margaret Grant, wife of the former investor Philip, leaned toward her husband with a frown, her emerald earrings catching the light. "It's disgraceful, really, just standing there like she belongs." Philip nodded, his lips tight. Logan always had a soft spot for strays. This one's just another leech. The insults were no longer whispered, they were part of the room now. A shared, unspoken agreement that Alina was less, unworthy, out of place. No one stepped in, no one spoke up. The room, filled with people so eager to claim Marcus Whitmore's fortune, found common ground in their contempt for the quiet woman by the window. But Alina, the woman they mocked so easily, did not retreat. Her back stayed straight, her eyes steady, her silence louder than all their voices combined. And though none of them knew it yet, the price for their arrogance had already been set. At precisely 10 o'clock, the heavy wooden doors at the front of the hall creaked open, cutting through the snide laughter like a blade. The chatter softened, then fell silent altogether as Harold Bennett entered the room. The lawyer's gray suit was crisp, his movements precise, carrying with him the weight of authority that only decades of handling powerful families could carve into a man's posture. Without acknowledging the assembled crowd's smug grins or their smug whispers, Harold moved to the center table, setting down a single leather briefcase. The metallic click of its locks echoed through the hall, sharp and deliberate. No small talk. No preamble. Harold scanned the faces in the room, pausing just long enough on Alina to make Richard shift uneasily where he stood, though Richard quickly masked the flicker of discomfort with a smirk. "We are here," Harold began, his voice steady and calm, "to execute the last will and testament of Marcus Whitmore." Heads lifted, spines straightened, eyes sharpened. "For those who may have questions regarding its authenticity," Harold continued, "the will was executed 3 years ago, in the presence of legal witnesses, and has been verified and sealed according to all necessary protocols." The mention of 3 years ago stirred a small ripple of confusion. Marcus's jet had gone missing only 6 months prior, but no one spoke. The promise of inheritance was far too close now to risk interrupting. Richard leaned back, arms crossed, already picturing the estate in his hands. Ashley stopped scrolling her phone, her gaze focused now, no doubt dreaming of the headlines and influencer deals that would follow. Harold lifted the sealed envelope, broke the wax with a deliberate snap, and unfolded the paper with care. When he began to read, his words dropped into the expectant silence like stones into still water. "I, Marcus Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my final will." The air thickened. "To my family, colleagues, and business associates." A pause, a breath, "I leave nothing." The words landed hard. At first there was only stillness, blank stares, confused blinking, unsure whether they'd heard correctly. Then came the ripple of murmurs. Nervous laughter, whispered disbelief. "What do you mean, nothing?" Victoria hissed under her breath, her painted nails digging into the back of the nearest chair. Harold didn't flinch. "I leave nothing," he repeated, "but this truth. Wealth reveals character, not worths." Now the tension shifted. The nervous energy turned sharp, prickling through the crowd as if the temperature had dropped. Richard's smile twitched. "All right, clever speech. But let's move on. Who gets the keys to the kingdom?" Harold's gaze didn't soften. He read the next line slowly, letting every syllable hit with force. All my assets, company shares, properties, accounts, intellectual rights are bequeathed to one person. The room lined ends. The one who stood by me for no reason other than love. The one who never asked my net worth, never sought my name for status. Harold looked up, his eyes calm and unyielding. To my wife, Alina. The gasps came fast, jagged, some hands flying to mouths, others balling into fists. Heads whipped around, searching the room as if the name couldn't possibly match the woman standing silently at the back. His wife, Richard spat, half laughing, half choking. Marcus wasn't married. Ashley's face darkened, her fingers frozen above her phone screen. Victoria's eyes narrowed to slits, already calculating, already doubting. Who the hell is she? Alina didn't move, she didn't need to. The fire had been lit, and it was only beginning to burn. The room broke into chaos. That's impossible, Richard barked, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. He took a step forward, pointing straight at Alina like she was a criminal caught red-handed. Marcus wasn't married. This is some kind of scam. Philip Grant's face flushed red as he joined in, his voice booming. You expect us to believe he married her. His gaze swept over Alina's plain dress, her worn flats, the napkin still pinned cruelly to her tote like a badge of humiliation. A woman who looks like she doesn't even own a proper pair of shoes. Margaret, standing beside her husband, crossed her arms tightly. This is an insult to Marcus's memory. She's a con artist, nothing more. Alina remained still, her expression unchanged. She made no attempt to speak, no move to defend herself. Harold Bennett adjusted his glasses, his face unreadable. Slowly, methodically, he reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a neat stack of documents. Without a word, he spread them across the table for everyone to see. This, he said firmly, tapping the top page, is the marriage license. Issued and filed 7 years ago in the state of New York, signed by both parties, witnessed by Emma Collins, a registered nurse, and Robert Hill, head librarian at the Kingston Public Library. The room buzzed, the anger now laced with uncertainty. Harold continued, lifting the next document. Here are certified copies of joint bank accounts, opened under both names at Marcus's personal request, maintained privately, separate from the family's known holdings. He held up several envelopes, yellowed slightly at the edges. Personal letters, he announced, written by Marcus to Alina over the course of their relationship, handwritten, analyzed and authenticated by forensic handwriting experts. Richard scoffed loudly, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. Letters, anyone can fake a signature. Harold's mouth curled faintly at the corners, almost a smile. I thought you might say that. He turned to the laptop positioned at the center of the table, inserted a small USB drive, and with a few clicks, a projector cast an image onto the wall behind him. Grainy footage flickered to life, the steps of a courthouse, the date stamp at the bottom corner reading 7 years ago. Marcus stood there, looking younger but unmistakable, his dark hair pushed back by the breeze. Next to him, Alina, dressed in a simple white gown, smiled softly as they clasped hands. Emma Collins and Robert Hill stood behind them, clapping as the newlyweds kissed. The room held its breath. Victoria's lips parted, her face draining of color. No, this can't be real. Ashley's phone slipped slightly in her grip as her fingers trembled. Even she couldn't tear her eyes from the screen. Daniel cursed under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Jenna leaned closer to Ashley, whispering, "That looks legit." But still, Richard wasn't ready to let go. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. This is a setup. A trick, I demand independent verification. Harold didn't blink. Verification is already complete. Silence followed, but beneath it the fear had started to bloom. Their certainty, their arrogance, it was cracking. And Alina. She stood in the same spot by the window, unmoved, watching, waiting. The storm was only just beginning. The room crackled with tension, the silence now so heavy it felt like the air itself could shatter. Alina finally moved. Slow, deliberate, she stepped away from the window, the soft thud of her worn flats against the marble floor the only sound as every eye followed her. She didn't rush, she didn't shrink. She stood straight, her shoulders square, tote bag still slung over one shoulder like she was simply out running errands. When she reached the center of the hall, just beside Harold Bennett and the glowing screen that continued to replay her quiet wedding day, she turned to face them all. Her voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and colder than the April mist rolling outside the estate walls. You're wondering why you didn't know about me. The question hung there, unanswered. Richard's lip curled. Because you're lying. Alina didn't even look his way. She kept her gaze steady on the crowd as a whole, the room full of suits and silk, diamonds and disdain, every one of them dressed to kill for a fortune they believed was theirs by birthright. You didn't know, she continued, because Marcus wanted it that way. There were murmurs, scoffs, but no one interrupted her. You see, Marcus understood people. He understood that when money is involved, true colors bleed through even the finest silk. And so 7 years ago, we married quietly. No headlines, no press releases, no staged photographs for society columns. She paused, her hazel eyes scanning the room, because he didn't want a wife who loved his empire. He wanted a wife who loved him. Jenna shifted uncomfortably beside Ashley, who bit down on her lip, her earlier smugness now cracking at the edges. Alina's tone never rose, never wavered. 6 months ago, after Marcus's plane went missing, you all showed up here. You all played your parts, dressed the part, grieved the part, smiled the part. But Marcus always knew some of you were waiting for the chance to pick apart what he built. Like vultures circling, just waiting for the right moment. Philip's face turned a deeper shade of red. Margaret fidgeted with the emeralds at her throat. Alina's fingers gently brushed the tote strap as she continued. The will you just heard wasn't written in haste after his disappearance. It wasn't an accident. It was part of a plan, a test. The word landed like a punch. A test to see who you really are when you think no one is watching. A test to see if you'd care about the man, or only the money. Victoria let out a sharp laugh, but it sounded thin, shaky. This is insane. Some morality play. Is that what this is? Alina's gaze met hers, cool and unflinching. No. This is the truth. She turned slightly, gesturing toward the blinking red light of the security camera mounted high in the corner of the room. Every word you've said today, every cruel laugh, every insult has been recorded. Documented. The color drained from several faces. You weren't just tested on your greed, Alina said softly. You were tested on your kindness, on your decency. The room fell quiet again, deeper this time, like the breath held before a coming storm. And Alina stood at the heart of it, calm as ever, watching them crumble. The silence was suffocating. Dozens of eyes darted toward the red light of the security camera blinking steadily in the corner of the grand hall. Phones lowered, smirks faded. Even Richard's jaw clenched hard enough to tremble, though he tried to mask it by adjusting his gold cufflinks. Alina reached calmly into her tote bag and pulled out a small black remote. She held it lightly between her fingers, her gaze never leaving the crowd. You've all shown exactly who you are, she said, voice steady, but this test wasn't mine alone. Then, with a single click, the projector screen behind her shifted. The wedding footage blinked away. A new video feed flickered to life, grainy at first, then sharpening into the unmistakable sight of Marcus Whitmore himself, seated in a dimly lit room, a plain wooden chair beneath him, no suit, no tie. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, his dark hair threaded with gray, his eyes sharp and unforgiving beneath heavy brows. The time stamp on the corner of the screen read, April 15, 2025, 10:32 a.m. Live. The room gasped as one. Ashley's phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the marble floor. Daniel's mouth hung open. Victoria took a staggering step back, her crimson heels wobbling as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly in front of him as he looked directly into the camera. His voice, when it came through the speakers, was low but steady, measured like a judge delivering sentence. Surprised to see me, he asked. No one answered. I'm sure many of you thought I was dead, lost at sea, a tragedy you could mourn just long enough to make your claims. His eyes narrowed, the quiet fury behind them unmistakable. But I wasn't gone, I was watching. The words struck like thunder. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring straight through the lens. I knew that some of you didn't care about me. You cared about what I owned. And I needed to know exactly how deep your greed ran. Richard's face twisted into something desperate. Marcus, listen. Marcus cut him off with a single wave of his hand, his voice cold. Don't. He shifted his gaze slightly, as if locking onto Richard through the screen. You were the first to call my wife a maid. Richard's lips parted, but no defense came. You all stood here today, Marcus continued, sweeping his eyes across the room, mocking a woman you didn't even bother to ask about, laughing at her clothes, her shoes, her silence. Not one of you questioned who she was. Not one of you showed her an ounce of respect. Ashley's hands shook as she bent to retrieve her phone, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. You revealed your true selves, Marcus said. Every cruel word, every smug smile, every whisper behind her back, recorded, saved, witnessed. He leaned back again, his expression unreadable. This was never about money, it was about truth. The feed cut, but the damage was done. The revelation settled over the room like ash after a fire, black, heavy, undeniable. And just when the air felt thick enough to choke, the grand doors at the back of the hall creaked open once more. Marcus Whitmore stepped inside. Not on a screen, not a recording. Flesh and blood, alive and present. His gaze swept across the room, sharp as glass. Without a word, he crossed the hall to stand beside Alina, his hand brushing against hers, a quiet anchor between them. The air stood frozen, caught between disbelief and dread. Their reckoning had just begun. The hall stood frozen. Marcus Whitmore's steps echoed against the marble floor like the ticking of a clock winding down on their lies. His posture was calm, but there was weight behind every stride, an undeniable presence that filled the space and left no room for doubt. He stopped beside Alina, their hands brushing lightly. She turned to meet his gaze for the first time that morning, and he gave a small, steady nod, the quiet confirmation of a plan executed to perfection. Then Marcus faced the room. To each of you standing here, his voice rang clear, you had a choice. You could have shown grace or at least decency to a stranger, but you didn't. You mocked my wife. You humiliated her. You turned cruelty into a sport. He paused, letting the silence stretch. No one dared speak. And you did it, he continued, because you assumed she was powerless, because you believed she was beneath you. Richard's throat worked hard as he swallowed, sweat collecting at his temple. Marcus, none of us knew. If she had said who she was. Marcus's gaze snapped to him, sharp enough to cut. She shouldn't have had to. Richard's mouth clamped shut. Ashley took a trembling breath, stepping forward, her voice softer now, sugar-coated. We're sorry, okay, we didn't mean. Marcus raised a hand, silencing her with a flick of his fingers. No. You don't get to apologize because you were caught. His tone hardened. You don't get forgiveness, you get consequences. He turned to Harold Bennett, who reached into the briefcase once more and pulled out a second stack of papers. This, Harold announced, is an addendum to the will, effective immediately. Harold's eyes swept the room as he read aloud, name by name, Richard Whitmore, Victoria Whitmore, Ashley Whitmore, Daniel Whitmore, Philip Grant, Margaret Grant, Jenna Wallace. Each name landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the hall. Due to conduct unbecoming, as documented via security footage, audio recordings, and direct witness testimony, the individuals listed are hereby removed from any claim to Marcus Whitmore's estate. All rights, privileges, and financial interests are revoked, effective now. The color drained from faces. Margaret's hand shot up, her emeralds glinting. You can't do this. This is illegal. It's ironclad, Harold replied without looking at her. Security personnel, discreet until now, stepped forward as Marcus nodded. One by one, the disgraced heirs were escorted toward the doors. Richard struggled against the grip on his arm, his voice cracking with desperation. Marcus, we're family. Marcus stared him down. No, you're just blood. Victoria's heels scraped against the floor as she was led away, her glare darting between Marcus and Alina. Ashley's eyes welled with tears as she clutched her phone, only to look down in horror as notifications began pouring in, her influencer accounts locked, sponsors pulling out, posts being deleted in real time. Marcus's voice followed them as the doors shut behind their retreat. Lies don't last, Ashley. The hall was quieter now, emptier, but not entirely void of warmth. 3 people remained at the edges of the room. Emma Collins, Robert Hill, and Anna, the estate's groundskeeper. They had spoken no cruelty. They had shared no mockery. And now they stood, heads held high, watching the fall of the entitled without a word. Marcus turned to them, his expression softer. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing her, for seeing me. Alina's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away before they could fall. Her hand found Marcus's, squeezing it once firm, steady. I didn't want to be right, she said quietly. I wanted them to be better. Outside, the April sky glowed soft and gold through the mist. Inside, justice stood tall. And Alina, dismissed, insulted, underestimated, stood unshaken at the heart of it all.